Hi YouTube, it's Kathy, and this is my weekly entertainment wrap-up for June 4th through 10th. This week I read 5 books, I watched 1 show, I listened to 2 podcasts, and I listened to 2 books. First this week I finished The Legend of Wonder Woman Volume 1 Origins by Renee DeLiz. I actually started reading this a few months ago and then had to give it back to the library because I didn't read it before it was due back, so I had to take it out a second time. Especially with just having seen the film last week, I love seeing another take on her origin story, and I loved seeing her in Boston because there were some sites that I recognized from when I was there, and I went, hey, I was there! It always fills me with like a flutter of joy to see places that I've seen before in person. Etta Candy had a much better role in the comic book than she did in the movie, so in the movie I was definitely missing some of her sass and fabulousness. Next I finished The Lotteries Plus One by Emma Donoghue. This is a middle grade novel about 2 queer couples that decide that they want to co-parent, and while the first child is on the way, they find a winning lottery ticket. They all change their last name to Lottery, move into a big house, and birth or adopt 7 kids, who are of various ages, ethnicities, and personalities. The story starts off when Popcorn, one of the fathers, has to go visit his semi-estranged father because he's had a house fire, and he brings Sumac, one of the daughters, along. There is so much that is wonderful about this book. All of the kids are named after Tree. Briar decided she didn't want to be Briar anymore, so everybody calls her Brian. Traditions from the various parents' backgrounds are explored, and when their Scottish grandfather comes to live with him, he is kind of a fish out of water, but not the most pleasant person to deal with. If you are looking for a read about an underrepresented family structure, this is for you. After that, I finished We Are Okay by Nina LaCour. This book follows Marin, who is preparing for a month alone in her college dorms over the winter break, but she just has to get through a visit from Mabel, her friend from her past. As the story progresses, you learn more about why Marin is alone and that her and Mabel were more than just friends. This book deals with solitude and longing, and it made me cry. All of the relationships between various characters felt tangible, and the information is dealt out so slowly that when it lands, it really hits you right in the feels. My 4th book this week is SlaughterhouseFive by Kurt Vonnegut. I read this as part of a collab that will be happening between myself and Jenny from Magic Cat Jenny, and to be honest, I'm still sorting my feelings out about it. The book, not the collab. This book deals with Billy Pilgrim and the unnamed author of the work during the bombing of Dresden. This is billed as fiction, but I picture the author as Vonnegut because he was at the bombing of Dresden. Billy becomes unstuck in time, and the book follows him as he ping-pongs around his time on Earth as well as on another planet where he lived in a zoo. It was slow to get into in the beginning, but I forced myself to read the last 200 pages or so in one day in preparation for the library-a-thon, which is going on now. I'll have my thoughts more in order when we do our collab, and when it's up, I will hopefully remember to put a link to it somewhere. My final read of the week was Ass Deep in Wonder by Christopher Gudgeon, which is a Canadian poetry collection I picked up based on the name alone. There were a few lines in it that made me chuckle, but I think I prefer spoken poetry, and being as I was reading this in the break room at work, I couldn't really read it out loud to myself. There were poems that would suddenly become incredibly sexual or graphic, and then juxtaposed back to yet another poem that name drops a person I've never heard of. Like with many things, I feel like this is probably more engaging if you know the backstory of the author or the poem. This week's show was Game of Thrones, as we managed to get HBO to give us the pleasure of watching the first 3 episodes. I first watched these episodes back in 2011, and watching them now, the characters seem so young, which is weird because I've only seen up until the end of the 2nd season. I have read the books though, so perhaps the characters look more weather-beaten in my mind because of that. This week I listened to Lore and Welcome to Night Vale, and because I've talked about them before, I won't go into too much detail. The Lore episode I listened to centered around spontaneous human combustion, so I now want to read up on that subject, and if you have any book recommendations, let a girl know down in the comments below. As for our small desert town where the sun is hot, I adore that they are continually bringing in new voice actors to fill the different voices from the community. Needless to say, for anyone who's seen me talk about either of these podcasts before, I am incredibly excited that both of them are going to be at PodCon in Seattle in December. This week I listened to Maya's Notebook by Isabel Allende. This crosses Chile off my list for my Reading Around the World challenge. As you might have guessed, this book follows Maya, and it is an account of her life as she writes down in a notebook given to her by her grandmother. Maya has a complicated history that resulted in her being raised by her grandparents, and now she's on the run from the FBI. She's hiding in Chiloé with an old friend of her grandmother. This story details her life in California, how she became a fugitive, and her life as a gringuita in Chiloé. There are some incredibly harsh elements of this story, so trigger warnings for sexual violence and drug abuse. Because I was listening to the audiobook and there are no chapter breaks because it's read as though you're reading it from her notebook, it took me a while to figure out where in her life we were, because the story jumps between life stages. Despite it being an incredibly tough story, I found I really enjoyed the details of her life in Chiloé, as well as a perspective that is nothing like my own. This week I also listened to The Bad Beginning, which is the first book in the series of unfortunate events by Lemony Snicket. I've decided to go through the entire series in audiobook format, partly because I love the feeling of somebody reading to me. Imagine my utmost delight when I started the first book and it was recorded like a radio drama, so different voice actors for different characters, and with sound effects. Then imagine how freaking excited I was when I realized it was narrated by Tim Curry. Yeah, that guy. Also that guy. And that guy too. He's a very versatile dude. And also this guy. And also this guy. Even when he's animated, he's sexy AF. It's a special treat for those of you who actually watch the video all the way to the end to see me fangirl over the guy who is the villain in my favorite movie from when I was 4. It. Anyway, I love the writing in this series and the convention of explaining vocabulary words often in a very snarky way. So I'm excited for the next one to be available in my library's digital collection. That's it for this week. If you've read, watched, or listened to any of these, let me know about them down in the comments below. I also want to know if you're participating in the library-a-thon, because that is taking up a lot of my time this week. And books on spontaneous human combustion. Are there any good ones? Let me know about them down in the comments below. On the way down in the comment section, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you next time. Bye. Ow! Stop it.